I'm Caleb. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, sharing's like bungee jumping. It's kind of like, it sounds like a good idea at the time, and you're like, yeah, let's do this. Okay, yeah, and I'll be there, not a problem. And then you wake up that morning and you try and ignore the fact that you're going to do it that day, and just sort of, and then about 5 to 10 minutes before it starts getting worse and worse and worse, and then when it comes to that last, and I'll hand it over to, it's like, almost always afterwards, I'm glad I did it, but not right now. But yeah, jokes aside, it's a privilege to share at this meeting. This is where it began for me, when this meeting was at the Karisak. A lot longer than 13 years ago, actually. My story is not like Bill Wilson's story. I identify 100% with alcoholism and a lot of how Bill Wilson was, but for I guess a lot of the first AAs, it was kind of like wandering around in that desperation and loneliness and getting to that point of conceding defeat and then finding Alcoholics Anonymous and it being a really new and inspiring experience. I came here years, over a decade before I got clean or sober, and I was in and out for many years, doing it my way, I guess. Not really listening, not following suggestion, not really believing there was that much wrong with me, I guess. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic of this type, and I suffered a lot of years after finding the solution before I was ready to accept that solution. But what I can say is, for me to be sober for 13 years, or at least somebody, or an alcoholic of my type, to be sober for 13 years is an absolute miracle. I'm extremely grateful to be here. That's why I've never left, and some other reasons that I'll get into. But yeah, it's a privilege to be here amongst family. And I see the fellowship as my family because, these are the people that brought me back my life. So so I'll just tell my story. I think some people in the room have heard a lot of parts of my story, so I'm sorry, I only have one story. I'm tired of my story, I really am, but I guess, like I was telling somebody the other day, if just one person in the room finds something useful and valuable, then my job today is done. So yeah, I come from a good background. I wasn't abused. I didn't live in poverty. I had everything I needed. I had a loving, caring family, quite a large family. I have no one to blame, though I did. And I kind of came from that background, but I know in hindsight, looking at this program and what my disease is, that there was something wrong with me from childhood already, and it wasn't due to environment or circumstance or any of that kind of stuff. I just had the kind of fear, or experienced the kind of fear that manifests in my alcoholism in a way that it only does with people like me, I guess, to the degree that it does. And I remember being uncomfortable in my skin right from the get-go. In order to deal with that fear, I learned to operate in life, Defects of character for me were skills that I developed. I didn't see them as defects. I saw them as coping mechanisms. I learned early on that if I lie, I get out of trouble. If I lie, I get money. If I steal, I get what I want. And I did that from childhood already. I was stealing and I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And I guess to cut a long story short, high school, when I got to high school, that was when it really skyrocketed for me, because now I wasn't just in my comfortable little family bubble. I was around strangers. I was around a lot of other kids. And immediately I compared myself. And I guess in my mind, it looked to me like other people got on with things relatively well. And I'm not saying other people don't experience fear and insecurity and things like that, but for me, it was huge. I remember going to school being terrified, very uncomfortable, sweating palms, trying to strike up conversations with people. I found it, a horrendous experience, and carried on like that for quite a few years, just kind of being lost in that you know, I'd have like one or two select friends that I would kind of make friends with, and they'd usually be the kind of the people no one else hung around with, you know, the cool kids and the popular kids. So the more I tried to adapt into that environment, the more I kind of lost my identity, you know, as I believe we do. And I started to steal not only things from people, but I started to steal parts of people, you know, because I found that if I talk like certain people, I get a little bit more attention and I'm more accepted. And if I dress like certain people, I'll get more attention and I'll be accepted. And so who I was stopped then, you know. I started to become all kinds of masks and all kinds of other kinds of people, I guess. But when I got to high school and when I drank, it changed, you know. And I truly identify with, you know, a lot of alcoholics will say they don't remember anything massive happening for them when they started drinking. It kind of came later on. But for me, that fear just disappeared. I can remember a school dance that I went to where I drank before going, and when I got there, I was just the man, you know. I swaggered in there like I owned the place. I was talking to everybody. I was talking to the popular girls, and the fear was just gone, and I guess my brain just struck a chord, found a solution to my problem already then. But I can't say alcohol was my favorite substance, you know, but it did follow me in through the years of my active, and certainly when I drank alcoholically, you know. But my most vivid memory really was the first time I had a tranquilizer, because of, I guess, the difference between me and normal people. Because normal people struggle to sleep, and then they have a tranquilizer and they go to bed, and they sleep. I took the tranquilizer, and my whole world just came alive, you know. And I can't remember why. My mom gave me a sleeping tablet. I wasn't very old. I guess they wouldn't be done these days, but anyway. I remember sitting there and fighting the feeling, or at least fighting the sleep, because I wanted to stay awake and experience the feeling I was getting from that tranquilizer for as long as I possibly could, you know. And I remember I was drinking a glass of Coke with ice, and it tasted amazing, you know. And I was watching something on TV, and everything was funny and, you know, different, and everything was just... And immediately I was one of those people that just went balls to the walls right from the word go, because then I was in my mom's cupboards and in the medicine cabinets, and I was looking for anything and everything that might invoke one of these feelings, you know, that I experienced. I took all kinds of weird shit at that point. I don't know what half the things I took were. I would just go into the cabinet, find something, and drop 10. You know, that's kind of how I was. And one experience of which was with laxatives. Without the profound knowledge of pharmacology that I have today, when I saw the word laxative on the bottle, I related it to relax. Laxative. It relaxed me in the wrong area. But yeah, you know, I was, you know, all caution went to the wind, you know, and it was like, I don't know, just blood pressure pills, you know, Panard, it didn't matter. Like I would just take whatever I could get my hands on, and that's how I was right from then. And I guess, you know, I loved substances. I really did. In the beginning, it was like I found something new and exciting, and I wanted to try everything and anything and experience every different feeling that there was. I had little kits of different, you know, substances and things, and I really, you know, prided myself on kind of like wandering through life, being on a different wavelength to everybody around me. I loved that, you know, and especially when I found stimulants, you know, to kind of be doing things that normal people do while I was on a substance that nobody knew I was on. For me, was an amazing experience, you know, like I could be there around family, I'd chatter, you know, everything was interesting, conversation was interesting, you know, I often share like, you know when you sit with your grandparents and they want to talk about the good old days, and you kind of roll your eyes, and you know, put some amphetamine in me, and I will love that experience. You know, we'll talk about everything and anything, and I'll listen with rapture. You know, like just, and I could do school like that, I could do work like that, and I guess, you know, for me that was short-lived. However, you know, I all respect to people who manage to carry on for years, you know, or only discover the substances later on. For me, I was in rehab already when I was 16. I was in a psych ward in the town that I lived. And I'd say, you know, what separates me from other people is I like that experience too, because I was there. People wheeled out some food, a little plate of pills. I took the pills. I was drooling. I liked that. I was wandering around. I'd sit down. I'd have some food. I'd go back to sleep. I'd wake up. They'd bring some more pills. And like 2 weeks went by, and I went home, and it was cool, you know. Mad, you know. It's funny how you can always tell when somebody seriously has other problems because they don't want to take medication. I want to take medication. I like taking medication. I like taking anything. And I guess from then on, you know, began the real secretive behavior. The consequences started to come, I guess. The first relationships to start suffering was my family. My family started freaking out at you know, obviously how I was withering away and kind of using, and then I'd run away and I'd disappear and I'd come back, and then, you know, they'd catch me out with things. So gradually the freedom started narrowing, and they would check up on me, and, you know, I'd get away with less and less. And so I would just kind of go into rehab, clean up, you know, come back, make promises, act okay for a little while till the heat was off, and then I'd get back to doing what I wanted to do, was go back to how it was before. Because what was reinforced in my brain already then was, you know, when I'm on this stuff, it's awesome. I just need to get back to how it was then, you know. And on through those years, I guess I had up phases and down phases. You know, as the relationships deteriorated with my family, I started living alone. Started moving in with friends, things like that. I lived with people who used like I did. And, you know, even there were some funny experiences. There were some cool experiences. But, you know, the majority of it for me, even around the using friends, was I was worse. And I was winding up in hospital. And I was, you know, getting arrested and things like that. And it escalated for me until the rehab cycle began. And in this period, and it's like it's hard, like I'm doing like really nutshell stuff here because a lot happened over that period. But I tried lots of rehabs. I went to lots of different kinds of rehabs. I traveled. I traveled to different rehabs across the country. I traveled overseas to go to treatments, and I didn't understand what was wrong with me. You know, I had no understanding of that, and in fact, most of the places I went to at that stage either told me it's the devil, you know, or it's because of your depression or your anxiety, or it's because of, you know, you need discipline, so go work in the fields and dig trenches and stuff, or it was, you know, you need this medication, or so, you know, like I was never exposed to the disease theory in the way that kind of, I guess, only came later on, and in that, you know, some experiences that stand out for me was when I went overseas, there was this new drug that had come out for people with opiate addiction, because that ended up being one of my big ones. And they had come up with this new drug that would block your receptors, and you know, you would, even if you used it, wouldn't have any effect on you, and everyone thought this was going to be the new miracle cure for opiate addiction. And at the time, it had come out by a doctor developed it who was in Tel Aviv, and there was an American hospital there where they were actually at this point working to train other doctors to administer this treatment. But my mom, you know, who had gone to great lengths to try and get me better, had mailed this guy and said, "Please, I beg you, my son is dying, da 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 da." And so off we flew, you know, and I was the first person in South Africa to take what became naltrexone. It was called Revia when it first came out. And I went and took this drug. I went into an accelerated withdrawal. I was put out for like a day or two. I came out, and although weak, you know, this physical craving and everything had disappeared. And and kind of like, hopes were renewed. All I had to do was take this pill every day. Everything was going to be okay. But I didn't understand the obsession. I didn't understand the obsession and compulsion to use that I had. And it didn't matter whether you stuck anti-booze in me, whether you put a pill in me that would block my receptors. You've actually removed my only solution is what you've done, and then not fixed this. And I remember after that first week of Pink Cloud, it began, and I came home and I was trying to do life again and get a job and work and family and this and that and the other, and I was just dying to use, And so I did what anyone would do. I stopped taking the pills. I stopped taking the pills. I was using again, and then the one morning my mom was suspicious, so she made me take the pill. And for anyone who knows what happens if you've been using opiates and then you take a blocker immediately, you experience a very uncomfortable sensation for about the next 24 hours. So I was stuck in this bathroom. I couldn't tell anyone I had used or that this was going on for me, so I just spent hours on a bathroom floor, like one of the most horrific experiences of my life. Things like that happen to me a lot. Putting myself in situations like where I'd suffer and where I'd go through the most horrendous stuff or go to the most horrendous lengths to use happened to me countless. I mean, I can't even begin to touch, the amount of that kind of stuff that went on for me. And on it went, and it continued, and I guess, to cut an extremely long story short, another significant thing. So when I got to, I think it was 21, I met a woman, and at this point I had kind of just been doing rehabs and all that kind of stuff. I'd been single for quite a while, and I met this girl, and, she'd just come out of school. She was kind of, really innocent at that stage, nice person from a nice family. And, and I guess what stands out for me, just even in meeting her, I wasn't honest, like I presented this, humanitarian of the year, recovered drug addict and, amazing person who's fought my demons and I've come, alive and I'm never going to use again and blah, blah, blah. I just fed absolute rubbish. And she fell in love with that person, and so I think for about a year and a half, I was fine. I didn't connect the dots, but for a year and a half, I was fine. I didn't use drugs of choice. I drank, maybe a little excessively, but hey, that's normal, right? I was off all the bad stuff, and got a job, held down a job, family relationships were good. Everyone thought, hey, he's finally met somebody who'll get him okay and he'll stabilize and get on with his life. And even I guess I kind of thought that. But in the beginning, that first year and a half, it was this pink cloud of like euphoria of the relationship, What I didn't realize was like alcohol. I don't have an alcohol problem. I suffered from alcoholism, And as soon as I put this stuff down, my disease just manifests in the next area. It finds another out. And for me, relationships, next one, because then all of a sudden everything became about the relationship, and I was obsessed with her. That obsession and compulsion, the fix I needed to get out of the relationship, it worked. It worked for a while, like it does with drugs. And I kind of remember that pink cloud eventually disappearing and being in a mall one day with her, and she was doing some shopping, and I was standing outside with the rest of the men. That's where we stand in the malls when, okay, whatever. So I'm standing outside and I'm just thinking, I'm so bored, That restless, irritable discontent comes back. It just comes back with a vengeance. And I remember just feeling so uninspired and bored. And a little thought in the back of my head said, well, you know what, if we get a little bit of this, maybe it'll be better, just for today. I mean, we've managed to stay off it for this period of time, so surely now that I've had this time, and that shows I have control, that shows I don't have a problem, so we'll be okay. So I did. I shot off to pharmacy, and I got a little bit of something, and I came back, and wow, suddenly everything was interesting again, even the shopping, and I was like, and I remember this feeling that I would have time and time again on, like, it's just going to be today. Tomorrow I'll stop again, and I told myself that 1,000 times, but the problem was the first time I took it, it felt amazing. And then the next day I'd be thinking, well, how am I going to go back to how I was feeling before that? I rather want to feel like I felt last night. So I think, well, just today again, and then that turns into another day, and next thing I'm up and running. And I'm worse than I ever was before, and the progression hit. That woman, Sham, she suffered in that relationship for another 5 years. After that, I began the rehab cycle again. And I think like a lot of people do, it was always about getting her back, because what would happen is I would fall off the bus, the family would rally around her, say, listen, you need to leave him, he needs to go to rehab. I'd go to rehab, and then I'd be waiting for that first phone call, as we do. And I count the days. You know when you go into rehab, and a week is still a long time for you, like a whole week in rehab. I don't know if I can do this. It's too much, too long. Every minute feels like an hour. My last stint was a year. Anyway, so I'd get that phone call, and then I'd be like, hey, what's going on? Yeah, I know, cool. Learning lots of things about myself here. I feel amazing. Things are so different. I have such insights into where I went wrong. I just need to stay away from these friends and this naughty this and, and everything. And she's sounding good and everything's cool. And at the end of the call, I'll be like, I love you. Whether I stay longer than a week in rehab is determined by the answer on that call. Because if she didn't say I love you too, well, this is a waste of time. I'd leave, Or I'd get the I love you too, and then I'd stick it through. And I'd be like, oh, just wait until we get out of here, and then she'll come back, and everything's going to be okay. There's always this magical day somewhere ahead where everything's going to be okay. So it wasn't okay. Come out, I had no solution. And we'd go back into the cycle, And I'm trying to skip stories I know you've heard, but after the whole wedding incident and all of that I share often about in groups, and my brother and just the family eventually had enough, and I started to become that lone wolf that they talk about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was at another rehab for the third time, and I got this brilliant idea to smuggle drugs in, which I did. And they kicked me out, so I went to another rehab, and there I made up a story that someone had assaulted me. So my family came and rescued me and took me out, and then I thought I was going to go home. And no, sorry, it happened the other way around. I lied about being assaulted. I went to this other rehab that I'd been to 3 times in Durban, and then they phoned up my family, and my family were begging them. They said, well, we don't know where to take him. He's committed to six weeks of rehab. That's the time limit, and we still need to keep him in rehab, so where are we going to take him? And they're laughing because they know it's not about that. But anyway, so they came eventually, and they said, well, look, we're not taking him because he causes too much trouble here. They phoned a couple of other rehabs I'd been to, and they said no. And so they gave them this little piece of paper. They said, a rehab's open down the south coast. Give them a shot, And that's how I arrived here in Scottsboro. 15 and a half, 16 years ago. And so if you do the math, it didn't work that time. So I arrived, and I guess for me, my journey into Alcoholics Anonymous has been incremental, and through a lot of reference points and experiences, So I arrived at this rehab, and they were thoroughbred AAs, and I was exposed to some weird shit I had never witnessed in any rehab or any place I'd ever been. There was like concern groups and confrontation, and there was no client-centered empathy shit, and it was like they were just nuking people, and I thought, these people in it for the money, and there was all kinds of stuff in my head. But the first thing I think I identified with was the doctor's opinion. The doctor's opinion was talking about a physical craving as well as a mental obsession and compulsion to use. And I'd never really thought of it that way before. People I'd spoken to before and other professionals had said, you need to deal with your depression. You need to deal with this. And I was never really honest with professionals, so that's what they would tell me, because I wouldn't tell them, I'm taking copious amounts of this drug, that drug, this other drug, and this, and, like I would just go in there with bullshit. And and I remember being told I wasn't clean because I was on meds. And I remember being told that probably a lot of that stuff was bullshit. I argued that as well. I had lots of stuff, but I identified with the problem. I knew that when I started using, I couldn't stop. As soon as that first substance hit my system, I lost all control. And secondly, I knew that when I stopped drinking, this obsession and compulsion would gradually progress. And it didn't have to be the next day. I'd sometimes last weeks, or be in a rehab or somewhere removed from society, and I'd last a while, and I'd come out, and I would think about it all day, every day. I would feel uncomfortable in my own skin. All that stuff that I felt when I was a kid would come back. The fear, the insecurity, the anxiety, all that stuff. And it was only at that point that a little voice in my head, as it did before, would start going, wow, just for today, come on, you know what I mean? We'll just take a little bit of something, we'll take the edge off, we'll start again. And I knew, I identified with that, because that's what I did, time and time again. Obsession, compulsion would come back. Eventually, I'd make the decision to use. I'd pick up, the first one would trigger the craving, and then I couldn't stop. And I repeated that cycle for years before I believed it, I guess what I didn't believe that they told me there was that, although I believed I had an obsession and compulsion, I didn't believe I was insane. I know that sounds mad, but I really didn't believe I was insane, because as soon as I got sober for a little period of time, and I'd learned some interesting new information, I thought, now that I know this about me and I'm feeling better and I've decided I'm never going to drink or use again, now that will be enough to stop me. As we do, And I'd leave, and I would use. And I'd come back. And then eventually I started to kind of cotton on to maybe some of the things they're telling me are true. Maybe. And then I'd go and relapse, and I'd come back. And I'd be, okay, that part was true. I did that. Okay, cool. And then I'd go out and relapse and come back. Okay, that part's also true. And for me, it was like that process of elimination, They said, don't do this. I did it. I came back. They said, make sure you do this. I didn't do it. I came back. And it was over and over. It was like Groundhog Day. You know what I mean? I had 2 years of in and out of that treatment center and back into the rooms and back into where it was just Groundhog Day. Same thing over and over and over and over until, I kind of that 2-year period for me was collectively my rock bottom, I remember I never really related to when they talk in there about quicksand stretched in all directions. I'd met my match. Alcohol was my master. He talks about that loneliness that only an alcoholic will understand. I spent weeks, months alone. Where I would, my family, they wanted nothing to do with me. I wasn't welcome anywhere. I had a business. I was in a partnership with my brother. I wasn't welcome there. So I just kind of existed in this flat that I had using day in and day out. And I always share about, because of what comes later, I would wake up on this mattress. I would think my whole plot was around, I need to get rid of this anxiety. I'd wake up terrified because I knew I owed people money. I had the axes falling, my health, my teeth were falling out. I would have sores all over my face. I weighed about 40 kilograms by the time I came in. I knew I was dying. I wanted to die in a way, but I was a coward. I was too afraid to kill myself. I would go, at this point I'd start going to psychosis, substance-induced psychosis. I would, paranoia, police lights are flashing across the ceiling all the time. I'm looking through curtains, talking to people that aren't there. I used to be in Star Wars. I know everyone laughs, but it was that's how lonely I was. I had a TV, I'd put Star Wars on, and I was there. I'd be talking to the people, no, Luke, don't do that shit, because I just had no conversation, no people, nothing, days and days and days on end, I would steal shit from places, I would sell it at a garage, I would go to the pharmacy, I'd come back and to the dealer, and that was it. That was my life. And what I started to realize after those in and outs was the only times I was really happy, the only times I felt any kind of relief, the only times I laughed was when I was at this freaking house, at this damn rehab, I started to realize, where I'd be sitting around my fellows and we'd be sharing and I'd be laughing from the gut, and then I'd go back into that loneliness and isolation and I'd spend that time there. And for me, that was the beginning of the seed planting, really. It wasn't so much about drinking. It was about loneliness. It was about the pain. It was about the suffering, the misery, and then that little glimpse of a spark of companionship and fellowship and love, and unconditional love. And then I'd go back into that, And in the end, I guess I hit that surrender point, And people always ask me, if you did rehab that many times, because to me, I always hold a special place in my heart for multiple rehabbers, because that's my experience. And I know how hard that is. And people will say to me, well, how did you know, dude? How did you know this was your time? I didn't, The only thing I know was different about me the last time I came into Alcoholics Anonymous was I did what I was told. Simple, It was really that. I probably had some arguments in my head at times, or I disagreed maybe at times, but I was so desperate and tired that when they said, get on your knees in the morning, and my sponsor Don used to say, all these things that like to me didn't make sense, but I did it because I was told to do it. And it didn't feel right at first, but I did it anyway until it did feel right, When it came to confronting people, concerning people, taking responsibility, trying to be an example in the house, addressing things about me that caused conflict in my relationships, I just okay, tell me what to do, I'll do it, and I did it. And as a result of that attitude, my first year of recovery was mind-blowing, It wasn't a struggle. I kind of like, everything was just a breath of air for me, fresh air. It was just, I started to fellowship, I started to do meetings, I did service positions. As I said, I had this thing about time when I was in rehab, because that's how my sick brain would like measure things. It wasn't about life. It wasn't about getting better. And the last time I was in rehab, I remember they would call me in and they'd say, okay, listen, you're like 4 days over your time. So what are you doing? I said, well, I'm 4 days in, I'll stay. That happened like 12 times. And next thing I knew, it was a year. So that's kind of how I got in. I identified with those steps only the last time. I read them 1,000 times. I've done written step work 1,000 times. I never clicked that I have to live that program, And the last time for me was different. I was willing to turn my life and my will over to the care of anything other than me at that stage. So the rest for me is really just amazing experiences that I've had, over the years, and I can't fit that into a 45-minute share. Starting with achievement, I dropped out of school. I was useless. I was unemployable. I started volunteering at the rehab, just helping out where I could, and then aside from that, I started scuba diving. How's my time? Oh, crap. Yeah, studying, I really thought I was incapable. So I ended up doing a diving course that I didn't want to do initially. I got pushed into doing it. I loved it after, contempt investigation. I thought I wouldn't like it. I did it. I loved it. That's been pretty much a lot of experiences in my recovery. And with Don, we went and did this instructors. And I had to study physics and physiology and all kinds. I was like, I'm screwed, But I studied. And Don used to sit with me and go through the work with me and help me with that stuff. And lo and behold, I passed, And I did more after that. And it was like the first certificate, excuse me, on my dad's wall was my instructor certificate. It was like my brother with sports, and there was there was like there was nothing from me, That was like my first, wow, sounds like really small and trivial, but to somebody like who comes from where I come from, that was huge. My dad proud of me for something, for the first time ever. Okay, so I guess next big significant thing was I'd been single for a very long time by this point, in and out of rehab and whatever. And I did. I met this girl, not the right one yet. I met this girl in the meetings who was sick, I guess I still kind of was back then. And I thought she was attractive because I was still sick. And I guess a lot of people do, I heard suggestions about the first year. Why is the first year important? I didn't realize why. But I was told what to do. So even though I started entertaining this thing, I phoned Don up. He said, absolutely not. You're insane. What message will you be carrying? Not okay. This girl, cut a very long story short, was around me and a group of friends propositioned me. I had to say no. This was like difficult at this point in time of level of celibacy and duration. But what's important for me there is like my recovery has always been number one. You know, like, I don't care like what I want or what when it comes down to it. When my sponsor said to me no, it was no. That simple, and I said to the girl, no, sorry, you need to work on your recovery. If we can't be friends on that level, we shouldn't be friends. And that's it. And she thought I was, such a spaz, and well, too bad. Reason being, why I bring this up, and my wife's probably giving me the evil eye. But why I bring this up is because it was months after that I started dating my wife, And why I bring that up is about step 3. Because my experience in recovery has been I've only ever had to do the next right thing in front of me. It's really all I've had to focus on. God has guided me to all the right things in my life, And had I gone with what I wanted at that moment in time and not followed suggestion, that would never have happened, is the link. Because then months later, and my wife had obviously been in treatment where I'd been in treatment. She had left. And we were in the same circle of friends. And I liked her, she liked me. Manipulatively, I told my best friend, who was her best friend's husband, because I knew that would go to the wife, to her. And so gradually this thing kind of started to unfold. And again, I phoned Don up. I said, Don, there's this girl, Natalie and la 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 la. So I want to ask her out for coffee. And Don said, no. I was like, why? So, well, she's still in her first year of recovery, and it's not okay, and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, okay, fine. Stayed away. And time went by, and I phoned again, and I asked, and Don eventually said, yeah, okay. She's here, she's, doing well, doing meets, da-da-da-da-da. I think it's okay. So, cool. Took me a while after that call to pluck up the courage to actually phone her. Okay, that was a process of writing shit down to say on paper and all kinds of stuff. Because I don't do life without drugs and alcohol very effectively. So eventually I phoned her up and she said, yeah, I'd love to go to coffee. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, awesome. And she said, but I need to ask my sponsor, who was Julia, late. And so she phoned Julia, and Julia said no. And so we waited, And I guess, for me, just what's important there is, like I've just followed suggestion, If someone has said something's not okay for whatever reason, I've gone with that. And it's always turned out better. Oh, thank you. Shot. Now whoever's listening to the share is going to wonder what happened there because they can't see. Because I always wonder those things. So anyway, so that's kind of how we started dating. And I guess... I thought that because I've got I think I was 18 months at this point, and this shining example of recovery and 12-step Nazi and all the rest of that, I'd go into this relationship and I would be Gandhi, What you laughing at? So, and I wasn't, What I found in recovery is every new area I've approached the same way I always approach those areas. And I've had to learn. And through a lot of guidance, and I think this was when Don and I were at our, well, I wouldn't say closest, but had the highest level of communication, because I was on the phone every day with some mad shit going on in my head. I'd have to learn to deal with that and learn to deal with how to apply my program in things that were going on, because I was fearful, And like any addict, I would walk into a room and she wouldn't say hello, and I'd walk out the room thinking she doesn't like me. Meanwhile, she's terrified. If you don't mind my saying. But it was I tried to kiss her, she ran away. The first time. And there was a lot of just really beautiful things about that for me. Because I'd never experienced love. I'd never experienced a relationship and what that means. I didn't know what that meant, and kind of it was terrifying and scary and beautiful and awesome all at the same time, kind of going through that experience, and obviously it worked out. yeah, we just took things very slowly and one thing at a time, and so gradually it kind of unfolded. And I've got limited time, so like I got to skip then to parenthood, because that's, I guess, for me the next biggest thing. I thank God that I didn't have kids in active, and like I really have a lot of respect and empathy for those of you who have to go back and deal with that wreckage. But like for me, thank the heavens, like I had no wife, no kids, no nothing in my mess. So, everything I've experienced like that has been in recovery, which has been really great because I was present. I've got friends who were high when their kids were born. I've got friends who actually didn't even show up because they were high somewhere and couldn't function to get to the hospital, whereas I was present. And that for me was probably, I knew there was a God. I believed in God, and to this day I don't understand that God, but I've always kind of had a faith in that. Not always, but like in recovery. But that was my cement moment, where that was my biggest God moment to date, was seeing my daughter being born. Not seeing it, I couldn't do the cutting thing at that stage, but like when it popped out behind the blanket, I was like, wow, I cannot explain, describe, looking into the eyes of something you've created with the person that you love, and that feeling of like I'm now responsible, hit with a whole lot of fears over, am I going to make the right choices? Am I going to be a good dad? Am I going to be all that kind of stuff? But why I bring that up, and like I alluded to earlier on in my share, you got to remember where I come from is I spent all that time alone. I used to wake up alone. That was normal for me. I'd spend days on end alone. That was normal for me. I didn't have people in my life. I didn't have family. I didn't have any of that stuff. And I really, for me, believed that was the end of it, And then I look at today, and although I can't say I always like being woken up, today I don't wake up alone. I wake up, Jada was born, later on my son was born, and today I wake up in a home, my own home, with a family, with 2 kids who are, although slightly nightmarish, I think emotionally well balanced, kind of, healthy kids. And, to a normal person, that's normal. A normal person, they wake up with their family, they take that shit for granted because to them that's normal life. To me as an addict, from where I've come from, down to just trust is abnormal. Down to achieving goals is abnormal. To studying and achieving is abnormal. Holding down a job is abnormal. Waking up with 2 beautiful kids and a beautiful wife in a home full of love and going and sharing those experiences together and going on holidays. And for somebody like me, that's abnormal. I should be dead, if karma was real and if all things considered, like that's really where I belong, based on merit. And yet, from the very first year of my recovery, I've been given these things. And there's so much more. Some weird shit, like I'll tell you, weird shit happens in AA things. There's always a share about this judge, Don Gates, who always says, he doesn't believe how he's a judge. People don't know who he is, because he's sitting there telling people their, judgment in a court of law, in a Supreme Court, and they don't realize, like, where he comes from. Today, like, I work in a treatment facility, right? So if you think of on the other side of that, how many years I spent on the other side of that, even that, anyone who knew me before would be going, what? You work in a rehab, like other people, you're actually responsible for the lives of other addicts. That's pretty scary. But taking it a step further, I now run a training institution where I actually train addiction professionals. Because they obviously don't know who I am. You know what I'm saying? How crazy is that? And just, the levels, when they say things beyond your wildest dreams, which I think is actually the other fellowship shit. They say that here too, right? So things beyond your wildest dreams, like that's been my experience in recovery, and I guess in closing, what I always try and get across to people is just why we're here. I guess I came to Alcoholics Anonymous in the hopes that maybe I'd be able to live one day at a time without an obsession and compulsion to drink. That was the best I could hope for. And just for the nightmare to stop, the loneliness to stop, to be able to just cope. That was the best I could hope for. Everything I've had from the first year onwards have been bonus additions, because those promises are why I came here, you know. The things they talk about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous after the 9th step of recovery, those are the reasons why I still come to AA. Because otherwise I would have got the solution, I would have gone out there and done my own thing for the rest of my life. Yet I'm still sitting in this room today. I'm sitting in this room today to share with a newcomer to know that staying sober is just the beginning. Staying sober is like the simplest byproduct of working the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not why we're here. I mean, don't get me wrong. Being sober is great. It's a good thing. It's cool. But that in itself is not enough. I need a sufficient substitute, is what it talks about in that book. If you're going to take away the drugs and the alcohol and what used to take away that fear and everything that I had in the beginning, you need to replace it with something. And for some reason, when I live this life, when I work that program, when I apply it, it's helped me solve every problem I've had in recovery. It's helped me to have all the experiences I've had, from marriage to traveling to being overseas to studying to achieving to getting certified to running a business. I'm going to choke to death here. Running a business, being a father, working in treatment. You know, of all the things I've been passionate in my life, watching people recover is the number one. And I get to do that all day, every day. And most of you don't listen, but that's your problem. But to sit at a meeting, you know, one of the biggest buzzes is like when one of your sponsees is sharing their first year of recovery, and you know, you're not God, but you know that you guided that person into these rooms, you guided them through that 12-step program. You've played a small part in the legacy of Alcoholics Anonymous is mind-blowing for me, still to this day. That the things that have happened from the day that Ebby Thatcher sat across the table from Bill Wilson, and I gave their names. Damn it. Traditions. All right. And then from when Bill W. sat across from Dr. Bob and shared their story and how that's multiplied to how we're sitting here in a room thousands of miles away from where this all began in Scottsboro, you know, with a fellowship the size that this small town has, and how we're all sitting here today as a result of that. It's just mind-blowing. And how my kids wouldn't exist. And I know I've told this story 1,000 times. But if those people hadn't met, if they hadn't met up here in Scottsboro, and that facility hadn't started where I was able to find recovery in this 12-step program, to be in these meetings, to share my story, to have met my wife, to have had my kids wouldn't even exist today if they hadn't had that conversation 80, nearly 90 years ago. And we are all a part of that legacy of experiencing life and achieving everything that we can in life, and being able to sit here and share that message so that the newcomer can go, hey, not only can I stay sober, but those promises can come true in my life, and I can go out there and experience everything as if I never had been in active alcoholism. I can have those experiences. I can have that life, and the only simple thing that is required of me is that step 12. I just need to carry this message to people like me, try and practice the principles I've learned in those steps in all my affairs, and things beyond my wildest dreams is what I get, you know. And that's not my opinion. That has been my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. But you have to do it, and you have to do it like they say you have to do it, and you have to follow those suggestions. Because it's when I step my foot out of line or any of that, that's why I came back here and why I didn't get it the first time like Bill Wilson did, you know. Is I have to ask, listen, and do as I'm told if that's what I want. And I'm really grateful and blessed that I did. And I don't know why I did or how, but thank God I did 13 years ago. Eventually, ask, listen, and do as I was told. So yeah, I hope that for everybody in the room, and I hope, you know, some small part of my share resonates with you and helps you in some way in your journey. And yeah, God bless. Thanks.